Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sutta Study. This morning, we're happy to have with us Ayya Soma, our beloved abbot, who insists that she be called abbot instead of abbess, so we'll all call her abbot, which is totally fine. So this morning, we're going to be going through a sutta with her, the sutta on Is There a Method? So at any point, you're welcome to type in questions, and if you have questions to share that you type in, then I'll read them out for Ayya Soma whenever she's ready, and she'll answer them to the best of her capabilities, which are quite extensive. So at this time, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ayya Soma to share with us the words of the Buddha.
All right, thank you very much, Bante, and welcome everyone. We can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. All right, so this morning we will be reading from the Samyutta Nikaya in the Salayatana Samyutta, 35.153 for those of you who want to follow along. And as I like to do, normally we can read the sutta all in one shot and then go through it bit by bit. And so the Buddha starts by saying, is there a method of exposition, bhikkhus, by means of which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, apart from personal preference, apart from oral tradition, apart from reason reflection, apart from acceptance of a view after pondering it, can declare final knowledge thus: destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more for this state of being. And the bhikkhus reply, Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One. Take recourse in the Blessed One. It would be good if the Blessed One would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the bhikkhus will remember it. Then listen and attend closely, bhikkhus. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, the bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this: there is a method of exposition by means of which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, etc., etc., apart from acceptance of a view after pondering it, can declare final knowledge thus: destroyed is birth, there is no more for this state of being. And what is that method of exposition? Here, bhikkhus, having seen a form with the eye, if there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally, a bhikkhu understands there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally. Or if there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally, he understands there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally. Since this is so, are these things to be understood by faith, or by personal preference, or by oral tradition, or by reasoned reflection, or by acceptance of a view of it after pondering it? No, Venerable Sir. Aren't these things to be understood by seeing them with wisdom? Yes, Venerable Sir. This, bhikkhus, is the method of exposition by means of which a bhikkhu can declare final knowledge thus: destroyed is birth, there is no more for this state of being. Further, bhikkhus, having heard a sound with the ear, etc., etc., having cognized the mental phenomenon with the mind, if there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally, a bhikkhu understands there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally. Or if there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally, he understands there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally. Since this is so, are these things to be understood by faith, or by personal preference, or by oral tradition, or by reason reflection, or by acceptance of a view after pondering it? No, Venerable Sir. Aren't these things to be understood by seeing them with wisdom? Yes, Venerable Sir. This, bhikkhus, is the method of exposition by means of which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, apart from personal preference, apart from oral tradition, apart from reason reflection, apart from acceptance of a view after pondering it, can declare final knowledge thus: destroy this birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So we can dwell for a few moments contemplating this passage and seeing what is our sort of gut feeling. Lots of Dhammasukha, appreciation for the teachings of the Buddha, very clear, very to the point. So we can go a little bit back to the beginning and go step by step. So we see how the Buddha is talking to the monks at the beginning of this sutta. But once again, whenever the Buddha is giving us a teaching, so I say us because it doesn't really matter whether it's bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, samaneras, samaneris, lay people, lay women, lay men, trans women, and non-binary folks. So whoever it is that experiencing a human rebirth, that's who the Buddha is talking to. And sometimes he also talks to people who are not experiencing a human rebirth, but have some sort of form of consciousness. And so the Buddha starts actually with a question, which is a little bit unusual because most of the time it's someone who asks a question to the Buddha and the Buddha gives a reply. But he asks the question to the Sangha, saying, is there a way fundamentally in which someone can fundamentally understand, can declare with absolute certainty that they are enlightened? So destroy this birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more for this state of being, is a stock phrase that we see over and over in the suttas when there is sort of the final stage of awakening, which sounds so great. It sounds like finally we can kind of relax because the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. The cessation of dukkha. I love this stock phrase. And we can see a lot of times, both in the East and the West, actually, there's a lot of people that like to define themselves as enlightened. Some even have it in their business card. Like John Smith, enlightened being. You know, there's Joe the plumber, and then there is John, the enlightened one. And it's always very interesting for me to encounter such stories and to look at what is the information, sort of what is the process, what are they basing this statement on. And without me having to guess, actually, the Buddha is pretty clear here. So he says, faith can be one of the reasons. So they believe in such doctrine, perhaps, or they just have faith in their particular abilities. And they think, based on this faith alone, they believe that they have attained a certain realization. Or personal preference can be another way through which we can make certain statements in general, actually, not only, of course, in levels with our attainment, but just in general, as a matter of fact. And oral tradition. So perhaps we're following, well, back at the time of the Buddha, there was only an oral tradition. These days we have a written tradition, also a digital tradition. So fundamentally, whatever kind of sort of historical tracing that perhaps our culture or our lineage or our ethnicity, whatever is brought to us. And so based on that, we make certain statements. And then something that I personally do a lot, reason, reflection, logical inference. Not in terms of my awakening fundamentally, but just in general. My cultural conditioning is scientific materialism, so I tend to do a lot of reasoned reflection. And apart from acceptance of a view after pondering it, so looking at something, does it make sense or does it not make sense? Is it correct or is it not correct? So the Buddha is asking the bhikkhus, is there another way, another method through which one can actually say, I am enlightened, I have attained enlightenment, besides these different sort of more regular ways of brainstorming or holding views. And his disciples, being very humble, don't even go there. So they ask the Buddha, well, we actually trust in you, so please shed light to this statement, on this statement. And so the Buddha says, yes, there is a method of exposition. And it is very simple, actually. He says, here, bhikkhus, having seen a form with the eye, if there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally, a bhikkhu understands there is lust, hatred, or delusion internally. Or if there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally, he understands there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally. So what does it mean? So fundamentally here, the Buddha is actually getting to our, to something that, to our experience of every day. Not even, in particular states of samadhi or in particular states of meditation, but rather in our everyday basis. So, form, seen with an eye. Sounds, heard with the ear. Taste, felt with the tongue. Touch, felt with the body. Thoughts, felt with the mind. Am I missing anything, Dante?
Ear, nose, tongue, body, mind.
Nose, there you go. Thank you. So nose, so anything that we smell, felt with the nose. So really analyzing it, analyzing our experience and seeing, is there any lust, hatred, or delusion internally? And actually, right before we hit play on the video camera, I took a sip of this drink and my face was like this. Because this is a vinegar drink. So the answer is there hatred in the mind? Yeah, there is. upon taste, there was having basically perceived a taste with the tongue. There was hatred, aversion, dislike for the cringiness, the astringent sort of unpleasant feeling of the vinegar appearing in the mind. So yeah, the answer is this. There is hatred appearing internally. Now, I've been practicing a little bit of equanimity towards the vinegar drink. And right now, I'm practicing the Buddhist teachings of relating, for example, to the feeling in a different way. So instead of, there are two ways that I'm familiar with, or that at least got stuck in my mind, through which the Buddha tells us to relate to an unpleasant feeling. And one, it's to perceive the unpleasant feeling as a dart. So perhaps if right now someone stabs me, instead of wailing and weeping and basically fundamentally stabbing myself mentally a second time, instead I perceive it just as a dart. So I stay only with the first unpleasant feeling. And then the second way through which the Buddha advises us to approach unpleasant feeling is to switch our perception and perceive it as a pleasant feeling. And my interpretation of that is, for example, in the case of drinking a vinegar drink or having a bite of lemon or anything that we normally feel unpleasant, but it's not really hurting or damaging the body, right? So you can start by shifting intentionally your experience. So knowing, seeing, understanding. And focusing on the pleasant factor, pleasant sort of sensation of whatever we're experiencing with the six senses, actually. And we can do the same with pleasant feeling. Normally, we tend to lust and obsess about whatever whatever has a pleasant sort of sensation. So if we are consuming ice cream, for example, we tend to focus a lot on the creamy part and cultivate lust and craving, and I want more and I want more. So the Buddha in that case recommends to pointing our mind and our attention towards the unpleasant feeling that there is in what we perceive as pleasant. So it's what I call the ice part. Rather than the cream in the ice cream, we focus on the ice of the ice cream, and you can see how it's unpleasant in the teeth, to the teeth, to the rest of the body. Sometimes we get a lot of shivers. And so balancing out our experience. And then there's the sort of neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, a sort of neutral feeling that we tend to be oblivious about it. So there's lots of things happening right now at Empty Cloud, even though each one of us, probably of the residents here at Empty Cloud, are aware of only about like 1% of it. Why is that so? Because we're ignoring most of it. We're ignoring the sensation of our body on the cushion, our sensation of the air on the skin, our sensation of the sun rays on our skin, if we happen to have some sun rays that are touching our head, perhaps. So whatever it is, once we point our attention towards it, we can see, oh, I was delusional about it. And so this is the reflection also that the Buddha mentions here. Is there any delusion internally? And if there isn't, then we can say there is no lust, hatred, or delusion internally. And when he makes this statement, then he asks, since this is so, are these things to be understood by faith or by personal preference or by oral tradition or by reason reflection or by acceptance of a view after pondering it? Does this way of experiencing reality, does it have to do with anything else besides experience fundamentally? And the answer is obviously no. So getting back to a lot of teachers claiming enlightenment, when I've done the research on some of them out of genuine curiosity, I was finding actually a lot of papers, a lot of documentation, a lot of information on how they justify their enlightenment. And what really captures my attention here in this sutta is how the Buddha, it took him like 2 seconds fundamentally to break it down. No need for, sort of treatise trying to justify, for example, having greed in the mind. There's this lay teacher that I won't name any names these days, but has some interesting, peculiar views of enlightenment and claims to be an enlightened being. And in his breakdown, he justifies actually having greed in the mind or having hatred in the mind, equates certain stages of awakening with the increase of greed, hatred, and delusion. So all in all, obviously antithetical to the Buddhist teachings and to the statement here. So the way that he tries to sort of justify his state of being is through a lot of logical inference, through a lot of reflections, through a lot of sort of research and justifications, but not with the core, with the essence of what are we trying to do here. And enlightenment, the Buddha tells us over and over again, another way to describe awakening is the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. And this is a very simple reflection that he invites us to do, that is experiential, that we can know for ourselves. Nobody has to tell us. We don't need to go to meditation retreat with such and such person certified in such and such whatever mindfulness course at such and such school. But rather we can know for ourselves whether we have greed, hatred, and delusion in our minds. If we're honest, if we have the courage to be truth and honest with ourselves. As Bhanteji likes to say, when a lot of people go to him and claim to have some sort of level of attainment or not, and they ask him for confirmation, well, he says that's the clear sign that you're not, that you haven't reached that level of attainment. Otherwise, you wouldn't need for confirmation. Nobody needs to confirm the fact that you're hungry when you're hungry, right? It's an experience that we have, the experience of hunger, based on which we know we're hungry. And so the Buddha then keeps on breaking this down even further, saying, so aren't these things to be understood by seeing them with wisdom? Which somewhat gives us the idea that all of the other forms through which we are used to go about in the world, even the most logical ones, even the ones that I am the most attached to, so logical inference and acceptance of a view after pondering it, it's not really based on wisdom. So we see another difference. Prior to the Buddhist teachings, one of my biggest suffering was the fact that I could not understand how intelligent people could make such silly choices. And that's because a lot of times we tend to equate intelligence with wisdom. But in Buddhism, the two are very different. So I would say it's a sign of intelligence to, analyze things with reason, reflection, accepting a view after pondering it. But it's not a sign of wisdom. And a sign of wisdom is cultivating an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And practicing, like shifting basically our way of going about the world closer and closer to the Dhamma, in line with Dhamma. So we had a bit of a discussion the other day on truth. What is actually truth in the Buddhist teachings? And I don't want to get too, don't want to talk about that in particular today. But what really comes to mind is the reason why we take certain precepts. Like, for example, abstaining from lying. Of course, there is the implication of not harming others or harming ourselves. Very difficult to remember that you've lied to such and such person and keep the story even for a week, let alone for years and years or decades, lifetimes. Very difficult. So there's obviously a moral implication. But then there's also what we are doing in terms of cultivating the mind. So we're looking for truth, and this is one of the aims of practice, really understanding things as they really are. So the Buddha doesn't call the Four Noble Truths, the Four Ordinary, the Four whatever beliefs, the Four Commandments, the Four random things that popped into my head. He calls them noble, the Four Noble Truths, which has the implication of something extremely precious, something not to be overlooked, something not to be disregarded, but actually something to aspire to. So the aspiration of truth, and in order to get to fulfillment, to fulfill our aspiration of truth, it's important to get us closer and closer to the truth. As an attitude of mind, as an attitude of body, as an attitude of speech. And so our commitment to truth then creates the conditions for us to understand experientially truth, to cultivate wisdom. And safeguarding the truth, so really understanding how precious the truth is. And being honest whenever we're interacting with, well, both ourselves and others, really. So not saying, not going, only this is true, everything else is wrong, but rather sharing our thought process with others, sharing our belief systems with others, sharing the origin of why are we holding certain beliefs, like breaking it down for ourselves. And then seeing whether it has to do with intelligence, whether it has to do with faith, whether it has to do with cultural conditioning, or whether it has to do with experience. And in that way, we're safeguarding the truth and getting, once again, closer and closer to the truth, priming our mind towards the truth, priming our mind towards awakening. And so the Buddha really breaks it down, once again, having heard the sound with the ear, nose, having smelled a smell with they like to crop the things, so now I have to translate it from my mind. Smell the smell with the nose, having tasted a flavor with the tongue, having seen a form with the eye, having touched a form with the body, and having thought with the mind, cognize the mental phenomenon with the mind. And so fundamentally, the Buddha says, if there is lost hatred or delusion internally, a bhikkhu understands there is lost hatred or delusion internally. Or if there is no lost hatred or delusion internally, he understands there is no lost hatred or delusion internally. And I find this passage really beautiful because there is actually no trace of shame. It's just very matter-of-factly. A lot of times when we have unwholesome thoughts in the mind, appearing in the mind especially, we can get to a stage where we're okay with really understanding how we're relating to sort of physical objects. But it's very difficult to actually be quite frank on how we're relating internally. What are our emotions in relation to our experience? So if we are experiencing anger, for example, as spiritual practitioners, it doesn't even matter whether one is Buddhist or Christian or you name it, whatever type of faith. We like our persona that is all like sweet and nice and good fellow churchgoer or good, whatever it is. So we can pretend that unwholesome sort of thought, unwholesome emotion is not present in the mind. And the Buddha points us in the direction of saying that is not useful. That only creates further conditions for suffering, further conditions for greed and hatred and delusion to arise. And there's this beautiful sutta, if I remember it correctly, it's Majjhima Nikaya 5, where the Buddha talks about the taints of the mind as blemishes and encourages us to be aware of them. And also encourages us to be aware when they're not present. So that in both cases, we do something about it. So it's not only sufficient to have, say, a peaceful mind or a kind mind, but it's also important to be aware that one has a kindness present in the mind or peacefulness present in the mind. And that is wholesome, that leads to happiness. So then we have the momentum to nourish it, to keep it there, not for it to fade away, not taking for granted the state of being. And at the same time, if we have a blemish in the mind, so if we have anything related to greed, hatred, and delusion, to also be aware of it, acknowledge it, because only by that we're going to do something about it. We're going to remove it. So if I remember correctly, he gives the simile of a pot, a stained pot or a beautiful pot, like a polished, nice silver pot, for example. So if we just take it for granted and we put it in the pantry or whatnot, and we just let it go, it will start staining, it will start becoming all gray and messed up. But if we're aware that it is beautiful the way it is, we're going to go periodically and polish it and keep it in that wholesome state. And if conversely it has a blemish and we just overlook it, similarly it will start becoming all blemished. But if there's only one blemish, we'll be very careful to scrub it off, scrub all that blemish off, and actively work on it. So practice right effort. So it's in the same way we should approach the mind. In the same way, we should really look at our experience and see that. And once again, he asks the bhikkhus, is this way a way in which things are understood by faith, by personal preference, by oral tradition, by reason reflection, or by acceptance of a view after pondering it? And the bhikkhus say, of course, no, Venerable Sir. Aren't these things to be understood by seeing them with wisdom? Yes, absolutely, Venerable Sir. So wisdom, once again, highlighting the importance of seeing clearly, understanding things as they are. And the Buddha ends, yes, bhikkhus, this is the method of exposition by means of which a bhikkhu, apart from faith, apart from personal preference, apart from oral tradition, apart from reason reflection, apart from acceptance of a view after pondering it, can declare with final knowledge, thus, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more for this state of being. So once we know experientially that there are no blemishes in the mind, that there is nothing that can arise, greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind, then we know for ourselves that there is nothing to do. And our mind will gravitate naturally towards compassion, towards caring for others. Doing what the Buddha has done, of sharing the teachings. It's incredible how the majority of beings who are reputed to be enlightened and didn't go around saying that they were enlightened, which is normally isn't it interesting? Normally the enlightened beings, they don't say that they're enlightened. It's other people that point them out as enlightened because they see from the outside that there is no greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. You know, the easiest way to actually be sure if someone is enlightened or not is to ask aversive types. I'm an aversive type. And that's because aversive types, so ask more than one, because aversive types can also have a great dose of delusion. But if you ask multiple aversive types what they think about one particular being who either is reputed or tells others that they're enlightened, they will have lots of things to say. And that's because aversive types tend to look at all the drawbacks, all the sort of things that are not quite okay about the conduct of the subject in question. And in this particular sort of context, I think it can actually be useful in the way that we really understand that the goal in Buddhism is a lofty goal. It's not just to be some regular, okay, average person average nice person like Bob next door, but rather really be a supreme, incredible being, free from greed, hatred, and delusion, completely purified. Taintless mind. And that is something remarkable. That is impressive. So whenever we see those, even like partial qualities, so not even a fully enlightened being, but someone who is a dedicated practitioner, these qualities are remarkable. These qualities are impressive. They shine through. They're inspiring. They're nothing common. They're extraordinary, but a lot more extraordinary than levitating, a lot more extraordinary than flying or going through walls. They're extraordinary in an ordinary way. And that's personally what really motivated me to put robes on. Meeting so many monastics, accomplished in one shape or form, in different, even perhaps different parts of the path, not fully enlightened perhaps, but had really mastered certain aspects of the mind. What a beautiful thing. Incredible, impressive beings. And we can see that whenever we practice in accordance to Dhamma, that is also accessible and possible for ourselves. That it's not just something that certain people have access to, or certain people can acquire, or certain people are born with particular bodies or minds, etc. It's accessible to all of us if we have this aspiration and dedication to put it into fruition. And for that, I am very grateful to the Buddha, who has shown us the way and has taught us the Dhamma, the truth, in such a clear way, through which we really have teachings just like this one that are so clear to the point, where there is no way we can be confused or go in a different direction than the one that he has pointed in a very compassionate way to us. So this is what comes to mind this morning. So perhaps I'll end it here, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Ayya. And we do have some questions. So first off, Michael asks, am I right in thinking that the sutta hinges on the word wisdom? Would you kindly explicate that word for us?
What does hinges mean?
Like that this is the critical central part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have already gone through that. I don't know what time you...
That was very early on.
Very early on. So I think I kind of went through it in terms of the equivalence of intelligence, well, the erroneous equivalence of intelligence and wisdom. But if you have any follow-up sort of comments and questions on that, I'm happy to get back to it.
And Gita Jnana asks, if one has awakened, one wouldn't go around announcing it, is my understanding. Is this correct? I think you spoke about that as well.
Yeah, I spoke about that as well, but I would say that normally not, but there are certain factors that could sort of create an exception to that. So in the case of a Sammasambuddha, for example, obviously the Buddha, as soon as he attained awakening, he knew it for himself, and he told people, but not told people in the way like, I am the awakened one, oh, I am like so great and you guys are not, but rather in an incredibly compassionate way. No different than when a researcher, if he discovers, say, a vaccine or a cure, say if they discovered a cure for cancer, tomorrow, whoever researcher is doing that work, they would go and tell people, like, finally, I found this cure. May it be for the happiness and welfare of all beings. So it comes, the intention is extremely important here. Of course, as monastics, we also have lots of precepts. So any follower of the historical Buddha has certain precepts to follow. So there's that. We normally don't go around and sharing this, but there is an exception of Ajahn Mahabua, who felt the need to tell people that he was an awakened being because the conditions back then in Thailand were so that people thought it wasn't possible anymore to attain awakening, that it was something that was only possible at the time of the Buddha, and that there was no purpose, no kind of need to actually even make an effort to practice the Buddhist teachings. But all one should do was to wait for, the next life and be reborn in a better circumstance. So out of compassion, once again, for all beings, Ajahn Mahabua, on the other hand, shared, I have attained full enlightenment. Please trust me, this is possible. You can do it too. So you'll see that in the few exceptions that we have of people who are reputed to be awakened, so not people who just go around and say, hi, I'm awakened, like they just woke up one morning and have this view. But whenever there are sort of exceptional stages when they're reputed to be awakened and they confirm that they are awakened beings, it's because there is a need, a compassionate need for others. So there is no self-interest. You'll see that a lot of people, actually, the ones that I was talking about, enlightened person, whatever, certificate, you can find lots of different courses that they provide at level A, level B, level C. Fundamentally, it's capitalism. Fundamentally, it's gain, honor, praise. Whenever we see those traces, then we can see, okay, this person is clearly not a renunciant. And by renunciant, I don't mean wearing robes necessarily, but someone who has this passion for these worldly things, who has let go. That's the core of the Buddhist teachings, is renunciation, letting go, the joy of missing out. If the mind tends towards accumulation, towards fame, towards greed of any type of sort, even if it's partially you're giving the things for free, partially not, or even entirely giving things for free, but you're very much interested in being in the spotlight, those are all signs of greed. Praise, honor, gain, as the Buddha says, vile, obstructive to the attainment of awakening. So they cannot be the product of awakening. So there's clear marks of how we can see the distinction. But yeah, in general, awakened beings don't go highlighting their attainments.
Okay, thank you. And we have two more questions. Gitanyana also asks, we have also heard that if a being is awakened and is asked for help in the path, they would help, including a Pacceka Buddha.
I'm not sure about the Pacceka Buddha. Maybe that's a question for Bhante Sudazo, or I'll try. My understanding is that Pacceka Buddha, perhaps he'll try to help, but he hasn't developed the karma of being capable of helping everyone. Or helping everyone who wants to be helped. That's also very important, because it's not that also the Asama Sambuddha, so the historical Buddha Shakyamuni Buddha, he was not capable of helping any single being that he would see or encounter along the path. He would be capable of helping anyone who was interested in being helped. Now, in the case of a Pacceka Buddha encountering someone who wants to be helped, well, there's the hindrance of the fact that the Pacceka Buddha does not have the karmic conditions of a Samasa Buddha, which means that even though they were capable of finding the teachings of awakening for themselves and realizing awakening, they're not perhaps great teachers. It's just a simple sort of skill set. But perhaps Bhante Sudaso, who is more qualified, can answer better this question.
Yeah, your answer is correct. So Pacceka Buddha is enlightened, but they don't have the skills of a teacher such that they could explain to other people how to reach enlightenment. So they might be able to talk about what enlightenment feels like, but they wouldn't be able to tell you how to get there.
Thank you, Bhante.
And the last question, Mark asks, so of the three, greed, hatred, and delusion, what would guilt be? Delusion? Could you elaborate?
Guilt? Out of greed, hatred, and delusion, I would say a mix between hatred and delusion. I mean, fundamentally, everything is rooted in ignorance. But yeah, that's what kind of comes to mind. I gave a talk a while back, actually, on breaking down guilt. So if you want more information, you can find that in our YouTube channel.
Okay, and that's the last question. So thank you, Ayya Soma, for sharing the Buddha's teachings with us. And thank you to everyone who joined in today. It's wonderful that we all come together and investigate the Buddha's teachings together. And may this be a condition for all beings to attain awakening. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening at 7:30. So have a great day.